Welcome. Our series is based on the historical study Savannah's Own, the Irish Jasper Greens, 1842 to 1865, a detailed chronicle of an Irish-American militia company whose journey reflects the struggles and triumphs of immigrant identity in the 19th century South, drawing directly from that text. We'll unpack the key moments that defined this proud unit, their formation, their trials, and their enduring legacy in Savannah's civic life.
Before we dive into the story itself, let us tell you a little about who we are.
My name is Patrick Collins, your narrator and guide through these episodes, bringing context and questions that bridge the past to the present.
And I'm Thomas Keegan, researcher and reenactor, here to provide the depth, the details, and the human perspective that make this story come alive.
Together, we'll trace how ordinary immigrants sought belonging in a divided world, and how, through courage, discipline, and symbolism, they forged an identity that still echoes through Savannah's history. But first, a series outline. Episode 1. The Birth of a Company, 1842 to 1848. We will discuss how a group of Irish laborers turned ambition into respectability by forming the Irish Jasper Greens, a company born not from war, but from the human need for belonging.
Episode 2, To Mexico and Back, 1846 to 1848. We will explore the company's first national service during the Mexican War, their trials, and the recognition they earned upon their return home.
Episode 3, Peace, Pride, and Parade, 1849 to 1860. We will tell the story of the post-war years of civic prominence, when the Jaspers became symbols of Irish identity and Savannah pride.
Episode 4, Fort Pulaski and the Coming Storm, 1861 to 1862. We will look at secession, reorganization under the Confederacy, and the challenges of loyalty and survival as the Civil War begins.
Episode 5, Through Fire and Iron, 1863 to 1865. We will look at the company's service in the later years of the war, the fall of Savannah, and the legacy of the men who carried their green-striped banner to the end.
Epilogue, Memory and Meaning. We will reflect on how the Irish Jasper Greens have been remembered, their influence on Savannah's culture, their presence in reenactments today, and what their story still teaches about identity, service, and belonging.
So, pour a cup of coffee, settle in, and journey with us into the past, to the lamplit rooms of 1840s Savannah, where ambition met opportunity, and where a handful of Irish immigrants built not just a militia, but a legacy. It is a curious thing how history so often turns upon the quiet decisions of ordinary men striving for recognition. Welcome to this telling of the Irish Jasper Greens, a company born not from war's necessity, but from the human desire for belonging, respect, and standing. Imagine creating an entire military company just to gain social status. That's exactly what a group of Irish immigrants did in 1842 Savannah. And the remarkable thing is, their plan worked beautifully.
Now that's a fascinating approach to upward mobility. What would drive a group of working-class immigrants to take such an unusual path?
To really understand it, you have to picture the social landscape of Savannah in the 1840s. Militia companies weren't just military outfits. They were elite social institutions. They marched in civic parades, led public celebrations, hosted elegant balls, and stood at the center of ceremonial life. Membership meant visibility, respectability, and influence. For Irish laborers and craftsmen who were new to Savannah and often looked down upon, forming a militia company was like founding an exclusive social club that came preloaded with prestige.
So in a way, they were hacking the hierarchy of the antebellum South. They were outsiders who figured out how the system worked and then built a legitimate place for themselves inside it. But how exactly did they manage to pull this off?
Well, that's where their ingenuity really shines. From the outset, they faced a big problem. They needed a name, something that would immediately signal legitimacy, honor, and connection to Savannah's past. The trouble was, unlike the city's Germans or Jews, who had been established in Savannah for nearly a century, the Irish community didn't have deep local roots. They couldn't point to some historical Irish company or long-standing tradition. So they solved the problem with a stroke of symbolic brilliance. They claimed Sergeant William Jasper, a Revolutionary War hero who died defending Savannah in 1779. His ancestry wasn't even firmly known. Historians were unsure whether he was actually Irish, but that didn't matter. To Savannah's Irish immigrants, Jasper embodied the perfect narrative. A man of ordinary birth who achieved extraordinary honor through bravery. By adopting him as their namesake, they weren't just borrowing a hero. They were writing themselves directly into Savannah's revolutionary legacy.
It was a bold claim, and I would bet a strategic one.
You know what's truly fascinating about that choice? They weren't just naming a company. They were crafting a story about who they were and what they aspired to be. They were declaring that they, too, were loyal to the Republic, that they, too, could be defenders of the city. It was a master class in cultural integration through symbolism.
And the symbolism didn't stop with the name. Take their uniforms. They didn't go with something generic. They chose bold blue coats with a striking green stripe up the trousers, unmistakably Irish, unmistakably military. Their buttons were miniature works of political messaging, the letters IJG above an American eagle perched over an Irish harp. That's an incredibly thoughtful blend of identities. Irish roots anchored under American allegiance, all captured in a single design.
Everything about the company was engineered to send a message. We belong here, and we belong with honor.
Their physical footprint in the city tells an even richer story. In the early years, they met wherever space could be found: mechanics' rooms, borrowed halls, the exchange building. These were humble, makeshift beginnings. But by 1848, we see them establishing themselves in a drill room above Mr. Davidson's bar room on Drayton Street near the bay, right in the heart of Savannah's bustling commercial district. That shift shows how embedded they were becoming in the civic and social life of the city.
It's remarkable how much their leadership strategy played into their early success. Their first officers included respected non-Irish citizens, men like John Elliott Ward and Henry Roots Jackson. These figures lent the company credibility in Savannah society. It was a smart political move. Associate the fledgling unit with established names before shifting leadership to Irish-born officers as the company grew stronger and more confident.
That's a remarkably strategic approach to community building, and it paid off. By the late 1840s, the Irish Jasper Greens were no longer an ambitious experiment. They were a recognized, respectable part of Savannah's military tradition. So what impact did all this have on later Irish immigrants?
That's one of the most meaningful parts of this story. When the Great Famine struck Ireland and thousands of new immigrants poured into American cities, Savannah already had a powerful example of Irish integration. The IJG stood as a living blueprint. You could maintain cultural identity, celebrate your heritage, and still rise in American society. They proved that assimilation didn't have to mean erasure, and that pride in one's homeland could coexist with loyalty to one's new nation.
Looking at this whole story from a modern perspective, what lessons do you think it offers immigrant communities today?
The truly striking thing is how the IJG balanced belonging with identity. They didn't try to hide who they were. They didn't downplay their accents, traditions, or symbols. Instead, They framed those things within the broader American narrative. They didn't wait to be welcomed. They carved out their own place, built their own institution, and contributed visibly to the public life of Savannah.
So in a very real way, they were pioneering a form of cultural integration that we still talk about in the 21st century.
Exactly. And the most impressive part is that they did it all without knowing what the future held. They had no guarantee their company would endure, no promise of acceptance. But by acting boldly, by choosing powerful symbolism, maintaining discipline, and showing up in public life, they created something lasting.
That's quite a legacy for a group of Irish workers who started out simply trying to gain respect in a society that didn't automatically grant it.
And that's the heart of their story. Respect isn't always given. Sometimes you have to build the structure that earns it.
The Irish Jasper Greens didn't wait for an invitation into Savannah society. They marched forward, banner high, buttons gleaming, and created their own place in the story of the city.
Let us look still deeper, for the story of the Irish Jasper Greens carries layers of meaning that reveal how communities rise, adapt, and assert themselves in unfamiliar lands. Consider first the world these Irish immigrants found upon arriving in Savannah. The city was a mosaic of cultures: British-descended elites, German tradesmen, Jewish merchants, enslaved Africans, and free people of color. Into this rich but rigid social structure stepped the Irish, most of them laborers seeking steady work along the docks, in warehouses, on the railroads, and in the swelling industries of the era. They were considered newcomers, their accents unfamiliar, their traditions not yet woven into the city's identity. In such a landscape, respect was not bestowed. It had to be earned through visibility, discipline, and contribution. The formation of a militia company was therefore not a simple act of organization. It was a declaration of intention. By forming the Irish Jasper Greens, these men were saying, unmistakably, that they intended to be more than workers in a city that barely knew them. They would be citizens. They would be contributors. They would be defenders, if called upon. And most importantly, they would reshape how Savannah understood its Irish population, no longer merely laborers. Now, they were a company of men in uniform. And what a uniform it was! Consider the symbolism woven into every stitch. The blue coats placed them in line with American military tradition, firmly and visibly loyal. These choices were not accidental. They were carefully calibrated to send a message that Savannah's Irish were both proudly Irish and firmly American. They were an early example of what would become a recurring theme in the American immigrant experience: the ability to preserve one's heritage while embracing the civic and cultural responsibilities of a new homeland. Imagine the early drills of this newly born company. Picture the men assembling in borrowed rooms lit by oil lamps, their voices echoing off wooden beams as they called the roll. The scent of sawdust, sweat, and tobacco mingled with the sound of boots striking the floor in practiced rhythm. Outside, the city's life flowed around them. Horse carts rattling down Bay Street, ships unloading at the docks, markets bustling with trade. Yet in those meeting rooms, something greater than an immigrant club was forming. A brotherhood, a claim to identity, a future.
Envision those early parades, modest at first. The Greens marching in crisp order, their new uniforms gleaming, their banner unfurling for all to see. Onlookers, some curious, some skeptical, watched as this new company stepped into public life. The Irish, often relegated to the edges of society, were presenting themselves not as outsiders, but as citizens prepared to uphold the dignity of Savannah. And as the company matured, the tone of public reaction shifted. What began as curiosity became respect, and eventually admiration.
One cannot overlook the strategic brilliance of the Greens' early leadership choices. By selecting respected non-Irish officers like John Elliott Ward and Henry Roots Jackson, they aligned themselves with Savannah's established society. This provided legitimacy at a time when immigrants often found doors closed to them. These leaders served as bridges, steadying the foundation until such time as the company could confidently elevate Irish-born officers to command.
In these decisions, we see a profound understanding of social dynamics. The Irish Jasper Greens were not merely trying to fit in, they were positioning themselves for long-term acceptance and influence. Their rise was not accidental. It was intentional, thoughtful, and deeply rooted in an understanding of how honor was earned in 19th century America.
As the 1840s drew to a close, the Irish Jasper Greens stood as more than a military company. They were a symbol of aspiration, perseverance, and cultural pride. Their very existence challenged prevailing assumptions about immigrants. They showed that identity need not be shed to gain a place in American society. Rather, identity could be the very foundation upon which belonging was built.
And so, by 1848, when they gathered in their drill room above Mr. Davidson's bar room, no longer strangers, but a recognized part of Savannah's fabric, they had already begun to shape a legacy that would echo through wars, generations, and civic memory. As we close this chapter, consider what their story tells us about the power of self-definition. These men, laborers, craftsmen, newcomers, looked upon the world of Savannah and chose not to remain on its edges. They stepped forward, created a company, designed a banner, and marched into history. Their journey reminds us that in every age, belonging is not simply something granted, it is something claimed, forged, and carried with pride.
And so, as we look ahead toward the years that follow, their trials in the Mexican War, their growth in the 1850s, and their service during the Civil War, we do so knowing that the early steps taken between 1842 and 1848 laid the foundation for everything to come. Join us again as the Irish Jasper Greens take their next bold stride onto the stage of American history.